Welcome to All About Adoption. My name is Christine Altwies, and with me today is a wonderful special guest, Leland. Welcome.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
Thank you. Thanks for coming. Today we're going to be talking about training in adoption and the importance of training, but we're going to talk about it from the perspective of someone who was adopted, is adopted, you, who also has the professional perspective because you're also an adoption assessor. You do home assessments for Hawaii International Child. So you have the wonderful ability to see adoption from all sides, from a personal and a professional. And so with that in mind, we're going to talk about the importance of training. But why don't we start with the very beginning? So your life, whatever you want to share with us about your story, how it started, and how you became an adopted person.
Sure, so the whole story.
Just give us the, the 20-minute version. Let's start with that.
Yeah. Okay, well, I was adopted when I was 3 years old by my aunt and uncle, so it was kept in the family. And the thing that I like to share the most with people that are going to adopt is how everybody made me feel. When I was adopted, it was very much a celebrated thing. I loved hearing my adoption story. I loved... even though, so my aunt was my biological mom, so my biological mom became my Aunt Edith, and my uncle and aunt Earl and Linda became mom and dad. And so my Aunt Edith was in my life as my Aunt Edith, and it was never weird. I was always treated very special by her. And my biological father wasn't in my life because he had a drug problem at the time. My parents always told me good things about him and told me how both my biological parents really wanted to keep me, but they just couldn't because of the situation they were in. And my parents who adopted me also wanted me so badly that they went to court and worked very hard to bring me into their lives. So it was never a weird thing. I was always treated like a superstar, and I always felt like everybody wanted me, not like nobody wanted me.
Which makes a huge difference.
Yes.
Right? That's what we often say, that kids need to feel wanted.
Yes.
That's one of the biggest things that we need to work on with kids. It's interesting to me that you say that your birth mother was known to you as an aunt.
Yes.
Because in training, we're often told that we don't want to confuse roles. It's important to call birth mommy and not to call her auntie because it could confuse the child. So can you talk a little bit about what it was like calling her auntie, and at what point did you really grasp that your auntie was actually your birth mom, and what did it feel like when you did understand that? Or because you were 3 when you were placed for adoption, did you already know and have memory of your birth mom, and so that shift was just a sort of syntactical shift?
I just feel like it's important to tell the truth, whatever it is. So in my situation, she did become my aunt. She legally became my aunt. She was no longer my mother.
Okay.
And my aunt and uncle were now my parents. They were my mom and dad. I think if maybe she wasn't really my Aunt Edith, and calling her auntie might have been confusing. But I also just don't think it's that big of a deal. When you're adopted and you're told the story, I was told when I was around 5, which my parents just thought that was the age at which I would probably get it. It's just your reality. Whatever it is, it's not weird to you. I just remember thinking, well, when you're 5, you find out where you came from.
That's fascinating. And that is also different from what we talk to people about often. We say, don't ever, don't try and figure out when your child is ready to understand. Just tell them from day one that they were adopted. But in your case, you were 3, but you don't have memory of being with your birth mom.
I don't, no.
So it's really encouraging, I guess, to hear that at 5, when you were told this story, instead of being like, ooh, now I can't trust anything they used to tell me because did you assume that you had been in your mom's belly, or did you not comprehend that at that point?
I don't really remember, and to be honest, maybe there were small little conversations or comments that built up to that one moment, but that's just my memory. I remember being in my bed and my mom tucking me in and telling me the story, and it just sounded really beautiful and really exciting, and it was never, she didn't think of it as a negative, and so I didn't think of it as a negative, and it was just the way my life was, and it was my story, and it's what made me unique, and I think that's what made it awesome for me.
And that was part of the story that she would tell you from the beginning, was your story.
Yes.
Which involved how much you were wanted, the extent to which you were wanted, including the details of they had to go to court and make a big deal about it.
Yeah.
All right, that's fascinating. And I love the fact that you thought that it happened to everybody at age 5. Like, this is the big reveal. I've been wondering, like, where did I come from? And now I know this is. How present was your birth mom in your life?
She was very present. My dad had 9 brothers and sisters, and so a lot of us, didn't get attention from all of them at all the time, like at parties and whatnot. But Christmas parties and different family get-togethers, she always gave me extra attention. And like the aunts and uncles didn't give all of the cousins birthday presents or Christmas gifts, but I always got something from her. And I love the nature versus nurture debate, because she was very touchy-feely and my parents weren't. And so when she was really touchy-feely with me and telling me how pretty I was and playing with my hair and kissing me, it made me really uncomfortable, but I loved it so much.
Oh, interesting.
My parents didn't really do that. They're just a little bit more conservative with love and affection. So I thought she was a super exciting lady, and I wanted more of her than what I got, but not in like a she's my mom kind of way. She was just my special Aunt Edith that was my biological mom, and it was really fun.
So there was no point in your childhood that you can recall where it was confusing or made you angry or made you resentful. It was just your story? And it made sense?
No, definitely not. The only thing that was ever uncomfortable is it made other people uncomfortable sometimes. Like, for example, when Aunt Edith had her first child after me, she was married, she was older, she was planning to have a child, unlike me, where I was an accident. I remember going to the baby shower, or maybe it was after she was born, my cousin Callie, and everyone was like making sure I was okay. Like, I hope you understand why Edith put you up for adoption and didn't put this one up for adoption. I was like, I totally get it. Like, and when your life is awesome as mine was, I had such a great childhood. My parents that raised me were amazing people. There's nothing to apologize for. I'm so happy the way things turned out.
And you were how old when your birth mom gave birth to her second child?
Maybe like 10 or so.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you just referred to your birth mother's child as your cousin, not your half-sister.
Yeah, because that's just how it was.
So you still think of her as your...
I don't even think they knew for a while. And the families, we weren't that close. Like I said, she was a super special person at the holiday get-togethers and whatnot, but she wasn't in my life, She wasn't, like, coming over and things like that. So they were definitely just cousins.
Fascinating. And I think what I love about your story is that we often talk about resilience and personality, because in our trainings, parents who are prospective adoptive parents often have appropriate concern about what is their child going to experience growing up, and how can I prepare to be the best parent possible for this child, and what conditions should we be looking for in adoption that will guarantee the best outcome. For example, if we adopt a child at birth, people often assume adopting a child at birth is going to almost guarantee a more seamless adjustment for that child. If the child is with me from day one, even though the child knows there's a birth parent, and even if we talk about the birth parent, the child will feel bonded to me and will have fewer challenges with identity and so on. Yet in your case, you were 3 when you left your birth mom. So your first 3 years, those crucial years that we always talk about, the first 3 years you were with your birth mom.
Yeah.
Yet when you moved to your future family, it sounds like it was pretty seamless.
It was. Every case is different, for sure.
And what that underscores is that we can't ever really talk about how it's going to be for any child until we know that particular child. That each child has a certain store of resilience or lack of resilience, is either a strong survivor character or is maybe more fragile. Fascinating.
Yeah.
Okay, so flash forward to teen years when we're supposed to sort of separate from the parents who raise us and we go through the individuation, identity seeking process. For a lot of adoptees or adopted people, that can be even more challenging if they're not being raised with their birth parents, because the question of who am I, how do I fit in?
Sure. Yeah, it was tough when I was a teenager, but I think it's always tough. We're not always exactly like our parents or even our siblings. But when you're adopted and you feel different, you can tend to blame it on that and get a little resentful and like, I wish I would have been raised by my real parents, because then maybe I wouldn't like be getting in trouble all the time, or you guys wouldn't be like misunderstanding me. I think just being a teenager is about being misunderstood, and when you're adopted, your mind can make you think that maybe that's why. But then you realize that almost everybody has trouble with their parents when they're a teenager. And I definitely, those were the years when I would throw out the whole, like, you're not my real mom thing, just to, like, really stick it in. I did that a couple times.
How'd that go over?
Not good. It was awful.
She didn't love hearing
I feel
that,
bad.
No.
I feel bad. But, yeah, you never know. You never know. There's disconnect with kids and parents of biological.
Right.
So.
Right. And I love hearing that. I mean, I love hearing that, you know, you're very transparent with this, and that's exactly what we want to be hearing as, you know, people who are watching this, if they are trainers or if they are prospective adoptive parents. We do want to remind ourselves that the teen years are turbulent, and we can't hold kids accountable for what they do in their teen years necessarily. Like, that's a moment in time. We don't want to freeze frame on that and assume that that's the child for the rest of the child's life, right? Children go through these challenging periods. And as you say, you were thinking about being adopted during that time, but you're not sure that it actually led you into behaviors that were maybe more dangerous or more challenging than your peers who weren't adopted?
No, yeah, I don't. Again, the nature versus nurture came up for me a lot at that time because I was pretty wild when I was a teenager, and so were my biological parents. They were really wild. The people who raised me were very conservative and quiet and kind of boring. Don't drink, don't swear, you know, all these things. So I wondered if maybe that's why I was so wild. But I was also the oldest. My parents actually, they didn't think they could have kids. That's why they adopted me, and then they ended up having 2 kids after me, which is a common thing that we hear about. So they were kind of winging it with me. In fact, I wish they would have taken a parenting class, because a lot of the tools that I have learned in my career would have been very helpful during that time. So,
such as?
Oh my gosh, how to communicate without getting defensive and making the person feel horrible for what they did. Appropriate consequences for behavior instead of just grounding them every time they do something wrong. I mean, my parents were winging it big time, and I had a bigger personality than them. That was kind of hard. And like I say, who knows if it's nature versus nurture, but their wholesome values and everything definitely kept me from going as wild as a lot of other kids. I think it seemed like I was more wild than I really was because they were so boring and I was so like colorful and wild.
And you did occasionally have the thought, if I were still with my birth mom, this would be easier?
Not necessarily, because my parents were so great, and I saw my biological parents, how they were living their lives, and I almost knew that probably if I had been raised by them, you know, I wouldn't have gone to college. I would probably be a lot wilder than I am.
And even as a young person, as a teen, preteen, you could identify that?
Oh, sure. Tons of gratitude for my life and the way that it was. I could see, because my biological parents were I mean, my biological dad wasn't in my life, but he was within view. I knew what he was up to. I knew what he had done. I knew I was so much better off. But as far as just connecting with your mom, I didn't have as close of a relationship with my mom when I was a teenager. And so I was a little bit jealous of friends that had real close bonds with their mom, like where they looked the same and they shopped together and whatnot. I didn't look like my mom, and we didn't have a lot in common. So I would wonder if it was because I wasn't from her, but still the underlining theme was gratitude.
You know, it's so fascinating. I'm happy to hear that, and it says a lot about you that even at a young age you had some kind of wisdom, because it's not common for kids to be grateful, you know, when their parents are strict or, you know, doing the right thing by them. Often kids just rebel and feel misunderstood. So it says a lot about you that even at that age you understood that. I'm curious about that. I guess there's always opportunity in a child's life for looking across the fence and thinking the grass is greener on the other side. You know, I looked nothing like my birth mom who raised me, and we had, I mean, she's an amazing woman, but we didn't have a close, you know, relationship when I was a teenager insofar as, you know, going shopping or doing things together. Yet, maybe because she was my birth mom, it never dawned on me that I wish I looked more like her, or that I wish she would take me shopping.
Sure.
You know, and I think it's simply because I took for granted that bond, that fundamental bond.
Yeah.
So that's interesting, and I guess from a training perspective, or from a prospective adoptive parent perspective, we need to keep in mind that there's always that opportunity. There's always that chink in the armor. There's always that place of weakness where our children who we adopt could be looking at things from that perspective, right?
Yeah.
And to be aware and sensitive,
Sure.
and to not take that for granted. You said something else that I wanted to get back to, and that was about how you got along with them. What is your relationship now with your birth mom, birth dad, and your parents?
So I asked for my birth father's information when I was about 16. My mom gave me his address. I wrote him a letter and asked him some questions, and he wrote back right away, and it turned out he was clean and sober. And whenever I would write him a letter, he would always write me back, and then email came, and then MySpace, and then Facebook, and then he was on a road trip driving through Colorado where I was living at the time, and asked if he could stop by. That was like 6 years ago. And so I met him for the first time, and it was great, and we have a lot in common, which is so weird that we just met for the first time and we were so similar. And he's very much like me. He's very loving, affectionate, mysterious, artistic.
Handsome.
He's very
Beautiful.
handsome.
Yeah.
He's very handsome, thank you.
Modest. Yeah.
Yeah, I just love him.
Oh.
Yeah, so it's been good, and he's had 3 boys, and I've gotten to meet them, and I have a lot in common with them, which is really neat. Biological mom, my Aunt Edith, when I turned 18, she saw that as an opportunity to really jump into my life, as though she didn't think she was allowed to until I turned 18. And we weren't very similar. She was a little too wild for me, and so I kept her at a distance. But yeah, we're on good terms, just like the rest of my aunts. Same kind of relationship, see them on holidays and whatnot.
And I keep saying this, but I really mean it with your story. There's so many points where I feel it's really amazing and important to reiterate or to underscore why this is important. Your story sort of hits all the highlights for me as an adoption advocate, as someone who believes strongly in the importance of openness in adoption. I personally and professionally believe that secrets, lies, can lead to shame and confusion. And I also completely understand why a lot of birth parents, as well as adoptive parents, may assume the automatic defensive position of let's keep everyone apart so that we don't have to deal with the discomfort or the potential for worse problems or bigger challenges. You know, that is a human tendency to sort of be possessive of what we hold dear and to avoid risk. And often these open relationships can present risk to the two sides. But your story, I think, underscores the importance of being transparent, being open. It doesn't sound like your birth mother's presence in your life ever threatened your relationship with your parents who were raising you. And that's a very big fear that we hear over and over from adoptive parents. Why they don't want birth parents in the life is because they worry that the child will be confused. You know, how will the child know who the real parent is, or who the parent of authority is, or who they can trust? And it sounds like in your case, it was wide open. And it was crystal clear. Even though at times it was murky, but to your child brain, it made perfect sense. Or at least enough that it was comfortable.
Yeah, it was my reality. Why would it be confusing? You know, that's all I had ever known was this is your story and this is where you came from.
And that's exactly what we tell parents who are open to this idea, and that is that if you present a reality to your child will accept that reality because you're the authority. So if you have the opportunity to meet birth mom at the hospital when she places the child for adoption with you, take pictures and put those pictures prominently in the home and tell your child this is your birth mom. And your child grows up knowing this is birth mom and not having those burning questions, which can really eat you alive. And even better, have a relationship with that woman. Any downside to that kind of openness that you can see?
No, in fact, that's reminding me of how really uncomfortable it was when Aunt Edith had those two kids. And the two kids, I wasn't sure if they knew, and like, it was never talked about. That was the only time it was awkward was with us, like at Christmas parties and whatnot. And I really wish that they would have put us all together and like had us have a talk. Like, this is your cousin Callie and cousin Clinton, and you guys are like half brother and sister. Isn't that cool? And so that we could foster a relationship between each other instead of just like, yeah, we're cousins, but there's something else, you know, that we don't talk about.
So you literally didn't know at those Christmas parties whether or not your half-siblings knew that you were the half-sibling.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that they did, and especially as I got older, I was like, well, sure, they know now.
But none of the adults ever sort of sat you down and said, okay, people, this is...
Yeah, and I just think it would have been really neat if they would have celebrated that. And like, look, Callie and Leland have like big eyes, like... What else do you guys have in common? Let's take you guys both shopping. Like, they never tried to, like, put us together, and I think that made them uncomfortable.
And do you think it's because they were afraid that you would feel resentment or discomfort? Do you think they were trying to shield you from pain?
No, I just think they didn't think it was that important. Like, you guys are cousins, that's it. Like, it doesn't really matter. They weren't sensitive to how it probably made me feel awkward that it wasn't talked about.
Because to kids, these details do matter. And kids are really aware of who's my sister, who's my mother, who's my birth mother, how am I related to everyone in this picture? Is it a neighbor? Is it the mailman? Is it my sibling? Right? Like, kids care about definitions and how they fit in. And this is an important reminder to the adults, I guess, is we don't want to insult the kids' intelligence by glossing over some of these details. Adults often do things because they think they're taking care of the kid when in fact they're often doing the opposite.
Sure. I think the truth and openness and honesty is the best for kids.
Hard to argue against that, except back to the point where some people would believe maybe there's too much risk in opening this all up. But I think the thing about parenting is that there's always risk. Being a parent is risky business. It's scary and it's risky, and you have to make level-headed decisions all the time, all day long. You have to be thinking what's best for my child, not what's best for me as the adult who might be uncomfortable. We are almost out of time, unbelievably. So as we're wrapping up in the last minute, do you have anything that you're going to wish you had said before we say goodbye here?
I really know. I'm excited about what we talked about, and just, you know, celebrate that adopted child. Like, being adopted is the coolest thing that could ever happen to you, because that's how I was made to feel. And yeah, I think you can't go wrong with that.
Okay, great. Well, thank you for being my guest today.
Thank you for having me.
No problem. This has been All About Adoption. I'm your host, Christine Altwies, and we'd like to thank Olelo Studios and our producer, Chris Castagnero, and our special guest, Leland. Thank you very much. Aloha.